What's good, everybody? Hope y'all doing well. In this video, I'm going to be showing y'all some music theory that, in my opinion, I think every producer should know. So this isn't going to be as full as in depth as my previous music theory video, but this one I'll be covering some pretty basic stuff and some functional things in FL Studio that can help you start learning music theory if you don't know any, and make it a little bit easier to integrate into your beats. So with all that being said, let's just jump right into it. I just opened up a new FLP with a piano sound and an empty sampler. So I'm going to start by going into the sampler channel, into the piano roll. I'm going to start this off by covering the main concept of a key and scale. So a key is the name of the scale. You've probably heard things like E minor or G sharp major, things like that. And the scale is the actual group of notes that falls within that said key. And if that doesn't make any sense, it'll make a little bit more sense as we go through it. So the first thing I'm going to do is go to the top left of the piano roll and hit this stamp. I'm going to go down to the scale section and select minor natural. And for starters, I'll just put it on C, which is the central note on a piano. So I just dropped in the C minor scale into the playlist. And I know this is the C minor scale because I'm starting off with the first note here of the scale, which is C, and I dropped in a minor natural scale. So that's where the key gets its name. So if I took this same exact scale and I moved it up to F sharp, this key would be called F sharp minor. And as you can tell, these notes are different from these down here. I'm not going to touch on major scales in this video just to keep things simple, and also for trap production, majority of the beats that you're going to make are going to be in the minor scale anyways. So all these notes that you're seeing right here, this is the scale that makes up C minor. So in other words, if you only play these notes in your melodies, it'll all sound good together. Same thing if you move it up or down. So if I move it to like A sharp minor, it's still going to sound good if you use this grouping of notes. I'm going to be using numbers a little bit in this video. All I'm referring to is just which number note in the scale I'm talking about. So the numbers start at 1 with C, and then D would be 2, D sharp is 3, and so on, all the way until A sharp, which is 7. And so scales typically have 8 notes. The 8th note is just the octave. So if this isn't enough to make your melody, which usually it's not, you can copy this up or down 1 octave. So I can take this and copy it up, but you have to have the same bottom note, otherwise it's going to be a different key. So if I move this to C sharp, for example, all these notes are different. So I'm going to move it back. And then same thing works if you want to move it an octave down. So when it comes to making your melodies and your 808s, all you have to worry about is making sure that all of your notes are on these lines right here. There are some exceptions to it, but I don't have enough time to cover it in this video. And there are notes that sound better than others, and I'll elaborate on that in a little bit. So now that we have all of these, I'm going to go ahead and extend these out. And one more thing before I go into the melody building in this, if you want to change the key of anything, all you have to do is just move it up and down the same amount of notes. So if I want to move this melody from C minor to D sharp minor, all I have to do is move it up 3 notes. So just count it up the piano roll, 1, 2, 3, and you just move every sound the same amount. And I'll show y'all a trick later in the video that makes this a lot easier. Typically when you're making melodies with a specific key, the easiest note to start with is the root note. And the next note that typically sounds the best with the root note is the 5th note in the scale. What I want to talk about next is the 6th and 7th notes in the scale. Typically, if you're making darker sounding melodies, you're going to be using the 6th note in the scale and not the 7th note. And for more melodic pain beats, you're going to be using the 7th note in the scale and not the 6th. You can combine them, but it just sounds kind of weird for the most part. And this is for your top melodies. For your bass notes, you can use the 6th and the 7th together. All right, so to demonstrate the whole 6th versus 7th note of the scale thing, I opened up a loop that I did. So for this beat, I used the B minor scale. So I'm just going to go ahead and throw that into a sampler channel so we can see it in the ghost notes. And you can see that every single note in this melody falls into the scale. So the notes in the scale where they're next to each other, if you use those, it's going to give you the darkest sound. So the 2nd and 3rd note and the 5th and 6th note in the scale is going to give you that effect. So I'm just going to play this real quick and you'll be able to tell that it's got that dark vibe to it. And so on this loop, I used one of those exceptions to the rule where I used a note that was not in the key. So in the B minor scale, the next note up is C sharp, but I use C for this. So for those dark beats, typically you can make this type of exception where you have a note that's a half step up from the root note, and that helps create a little bit more tension. And this usually works best for your bass notes, not necessarily your top melodies. You could use it for the top melodies, but it's kind of hard to pull off. And going into the violin pattern for this loop, I'm going to go ahead and throw down the scale notes again for B minor. To make this really dark sounding violin, I put down notes on the 2nd and 3rd notes in the scale. So this is 1, so this will be 2 and 3 right here. And then same thing for this over here, we use the 5th and 6th notes in the scale to get that dark sound. And so if we go to this bottom part right here, we count it up. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and 6 is F sharp and G right there. And so now I'm gonna go to a melodic loop and show y'all how the 7th note is usually incorporated. All right, so going into the chords, one clarification I do want to make, which I think I already did, but for your chords and bass notes, using the 6th versus the 7th note doesn't really matter as much. That only really comes into play when you're making your top melodies. So for this beat, I use the key of F minor. You can see in the chords, even though that this is a more melodic beat, I am using that 6th note in the scale. So if we're counting backwards from F, we have the 1st note in the scale, D sharp, which is the 7th note in the scale, and then C sharp, which is the 6th note in the scale. So both the 7th and the 6th are present in the bass notes, which is fine, but you'll notice in our top melodies, C sharp will not be in any of them. So I'll just play the chords by themselves and the bass notes. All right, so now going to our first top melody, our 6th note in the scale is C sharp. And notice how in our C sharp here, there are no notes, and even down here in C sharp, there are no notes. And so putting this together with our original melody, even for this other counter melody that I have, I don't have C sharp or the 6th note in the scale again. Just something to consider when you're making melodic beats or dark beats. If you're trying to make a melodic beat and it sounds kind of weird and it's clashing, check to see if you have the 6th note in the scale, and the other way around too, if you're making a dark beat and you got the 7th note in the scale. So let's say, for example, I wanted to change this beat to a different key. So right now it's in F minor. Let's say I wanted to drop it down to D minor. All I have to do is just count down the number of notes on the piano and just shift down every single sound by that much. All I do is count down how many times I have to move all the notes down. 1 takes us down to E minor, 2 takes us down to D sharp, and then 3 takes us down to D minor. And so instead of having to go into every single pattern and having to move it down 3 manually, what I can do is, if all of these are still in pattern clips, I can go up to my patterns here, select every single one of them, and then hit right click and go to transpose. And then once I click on transpose, I'm gonna have an option of moving it up or down. So since we're moving it down, I'm gonna use a minus sign. I'm gonna hit the number of shifts we moved it down. So we moved it down 3 piano keys. So I'm gonna put -3 and then hit enter. And for all of my pattern clips, everything will now be in D minor. See, we got D right here, even for the bass notes. That doesn't cover the audio clips though. For the audio clips, you'd have to double click on each of them and move them down by 3. So this one right now says +100. I'll just move it down to -200. And now it's transposed. So that's the quickest way that I know of. And if you have all of your sounds in the same pattern clip still, you can transpose within the channel rack. All you have to do is right click on all of the channels that have MIDI and then go to the top left here, click it, go to transpose selected, and that same menu is going to pop up. Let's say, for example, we wanted to move this up to G minor. I'd start by putting a plus because we want to move up, and then the number of half steps, which is 5, then hit enter. Now everything in the channel rack has moved up to G minor. So that's the quickest way if you want to transpose your beat. If you're throwing drums in there too, the only drum that you'll have to typically move up and down is your 808, because that's the only one where the notes really matter. And speaking of 808s, I want to touch a little bit on how to make sure that your 808s are always in key. If you already have a loop and it tells you what the key is, so let's say, for example, I pull up a loop and it says it's in G sharp minor. When I'm putting down my 808, I can open this empty sampler again and go to the stamp tool, go to minor natural. I'm going to go to the octave that I'm putting the 808 in, so I'll go to G5 here and then copy it down to G sharp 4. Now I'll go back to my 808 and all of the correct notes in the scale are going to be in the ghost notes, so I don't have to worry about putting stuff that's out of key. I'm going to start off with the root note here, which is usually the case for 808s. Typically, the other notes that you'll use for the 808s are the bass notes in the loop. For dark beats, it'll be the 5th and 6th notes and the octave of the root note. Again, you don't have to follow these rules like 100%, but typically those are the ones that are used. So that's a pretty good strategy if you already know what the key of your loop is. That's pretty much all of like the essential amount of music theory that trap producers would need to know. Is it 100% necessary? No, but it definitely makes your life a lot easier, especially when it comes to making melodies. It just makes the process a whole lot easier. Just knowing off rip what notes sound good together. So that's gonna wrap it up for this one. I appreciate all y'all for watching. Still working on that multi-kit. My hope is that I'll have it out by the end of October. No promises or guarantees, but that's just kind of the timeline that I got right now for it. And that's gonna do it for this one, and I'll see you on the next video.